And now we go to the third presentation about a very interesting Indian architect who actually worked with Frank Lloyd Wright, Nari Gandhi. I don't have a very large material about him, but as an introduction to his work, is probably okay. He was a unique architect, very unconventional, and I think he learned from Wright what Wright was so fond of, his phrase, truth against the world. Now, I'm not so sure Wright always served truth. In fact, he was a man of many hats, as in fact the title of a book on him is, A Man of Many Hats. He was able to negotiate with reality in very skillful ways. And I'm sure often he went a little bit aside from what he called so emphatically truth. Anyway, this was the architect, the Indian architect, who had a chance to work for Wright, being very young because he was born in 1934, and I think I forgot exactly when Wright died. I think 1955. Le Corbusier died in 1965, swimming towards the sun in the Mediterranean Sea. So this is Mr. Gandhi, an interesting architect, and you'll see some buildings by him. So he was an Indian architect known for his highly innovative works in organic architecture. But his organic architecture is a little bit different from the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright. Land is the purest form of nature, and buildings grow towards the light like a plant. Wishful thinking. This is the kind of thought process that inspired Nari Gandhi to give us great buildings with sensitivity to nature, organic, and yet resembling a strong geometry. Nari Gandhi's work was deeply inspired by the ideologies of Frank Lloyd Wright. His thoughts, ideas, lifestyle, and the belief system were so straightforward and path-breaking that he is often compared to Howard Rourke, the lead character in the famous novel The Fountainhead. Now, this novel, written by Anne Rain, I forgot exactly her last name. This novel is not so noble as some people think. In my opinion, could be a little bit misleading, but its virtue, the virtue of this book is that shows that the architect is willing even to sacrifice his well-being for the well-being of what he believes in, meaning his work. So it shows the architect as a kind of a revolutionary who stands for his truth, for what he believes in, and doesn't want to make compromises. Nari was full of modesty and would treat his workers very well. He was fond of the unconventional styles of architecture, sketching on the floor to make his workers understand the design better, and working with stone and wood himself. He worked on the building site with his own hands. He didn't build a lot, and some of his buildings were destroyed, were demolished, but you'll see some remaining buildings, houses. This is one of them, and here you see the influence, to an extent, the influence of Frank Lloyd Wright. This image in particular, seen from this point, reminds me a little bit of a church he built. It's not a church, it's a house, but it is very skillful, the ability to negotiate between a metallic structure and the stone walls, so it is organic in a multiple sense. So this lodge was probably the first project by Nari and is the best example of his climate-sensitive design. This was also the first time someone used the desert masonry masonry in India, which was inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright's rubble masonry technique. This renders the whole structure in a very simple yet classy palette. The living areas of the lodge are placed in a way that they receive maximum sunlight, while the roof with deep overhangs helps in protecting the house from the dense rainfall that the vicinity receives. Moreover, the plan is laid in the east-west orientation and triangular fashion to gain maximum daylight. It's a fine building. It's a fine building by any standards, and it is modern, but it's not aggressively modern, and it has some kind of a subtle clin d'oeil towards the past or towards tradition. So it's skillfully done. The triangular plan in line with the sun path and wind directions, the openings directed towards an unobstructed view of the nearby fort and reservoir, the use of locally quarried materials, and the unconventional look of the building manages to give us the best taste of Nari Gandhi's work. It is different, his work, from the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, but you see some breeze coming from the North American. A bungalow, very interesting structure. It makes me think a little bit of Paolo Soleri in the Arizona desert. It's a small building, it's not a very large building, and it is in India, but I think it transcends localism, because I think a very good architecture, even though it is locally, it belongs to a specific place, its meanings reverberate beyond the limits of that place. Now you might be a little bit reticent about those ornamental openings in the arch, but all in all, it is an interesting building, an original building. And look at this stair here, which becomes narrower towards arriving at the end. The functionalists might protest, but it's an interesting stair. A widespread pavilion with arch openings, large pitched roof, and the predominant use of red bricks. This bungalow at the coastal village of Korlai to the south of Revdanda is probably one of the most celebrated works by Gandhi. The brick wall is adorned with various punctures that not only aid in ventilation, but also add a playfulness to the elevation. The lower levels of the pavilion are supposed to have spaces like service areas, bedrooms, kitchen, and other ancillary spaces, while the upper pavilion areas functions as the living and lounging space. The idea of making the spaces semi-open with two huge arches supporting the pitched roof makes the space grand and acts as the main focal point of the design. We don't see here too many pieces of furniture, but that is okay. We also don't see any furniture in the last work by Ishigami that was just published yesterday or the day before yesterday. The purity of architecture manifests itself perhaps best when there is as little furniture as possible, including in cathedrals. Cathedrals at the beginning, as far as I know, in the Gothic times, didn't have churches, didn't have chairs or benches. So I imagine the majesty, the majestic quality of the cathedral was even more noticeable and felt. The fact that Nari gave immense importance to the construction techniques, design language, and materials is very evident from the use of hollow red bricks, stained glass, the flying buttresses, custom-made furniture, and the organically planned landscape around the house. It has an element almost of science fiction, some kind of a romantic science fiction. Another bungalow, again, the power of the diagonal, which always adds dynamism to the composition, and it could be easily made legitimate by the necessities of a sloping roof. Um, an interesting building, this one as well. And interesting is also the fact that he works with local materials, with stones, and his architecture, although maybe at the beginning a little bit influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, is distinctly his. And I like this rawness. I remember reading that Zaha Hadid wanted to have a raw, a vital, earthy architecture. I don't think she arrived there. Yes, she arrived at other things, but I don't think her architecture can be described as raw and earthy. Maybe some vitality it has, but it's not earthy and it's not raw. This is raw. I think this is a quality. It is said that this masterpiece by Nari Gandhi was constructed without a single set of working drawings or involvement of site engineers. Now, look at this. So he built this building without any working drawing. It's possible. I really think it's possible. So the torture of providing working drawings in the United States, a set of contract documents or working drawings is unbearably heavy on the architect. It is actually not made for the construction worker. It is mainly made for the lawyers if something happens, and for the insurance companies. That there are all kinds of notations there that show clearly who made the mistake and why. So it's all about mistrust. But here, you know, this building was built without working drawings, was just the dialogue between the architect who worked with the construction workers together, and they erected this building, you know, with bare hands almost, without drawings and without engineers. Fine. So personally paying, so this project involved a very labor-intensive method with Gandhi personally paying attention to every aspect of the design. The structure is composed of stone masonry walls of varying sizes and colors. These masonry walls were integrated with steel struts and trusses, which then supported the sloping roof. Walls of the internal courtyards are embellished with small chips of stones. Most of the stones used in this project were igneous rocks or indigenous, I don't know, from the Western Ghats of Maharashtra. And this implies that Nari Gandhi was very particular about using locally available materials and making the most of it. Strong use of geometry can be seen in the forms of the aperture used in the design, like semicircular openings for windows and parallelogram-shaped openings for all the doors. The structure, through its shades and forms, not only bends with nature, but also creates an organic environment within, and this is a purely a product of innovative thought process. Yeah, there is also a level of spontaneity. And I think spontaneity is a good thing when it is a good thing. Sometimes it could be a bad thing. But we have so little spontaneity really in the construction processes of today. You know, we make the contract documents, they make the drawings, we make all the details, and then the building becomes an almost a boring affair where the constructors, the builders, have to erect what is shown in the drawing. So there is no surprise. There is no, oblique line in the process, so to speak. There is no really much room for spontaneity. And that's why most buildings look kind of alike. Now, this is an interesting house. Well, this is not the only one that is interesting, but this is interesting also because it has this primitiveness, this archaic quality that seems to be a characteristic of this Indian architect. Although he was an educated architect, but I think just like in modern art, some of the greatest modern artists inspire themselves from the archaic. From archaic cultures, from Africa, from primitivisms, so-called primitivisms, I think we need that in architecture too, because it is indeed a way to arrive at what Zaha Hadid wanted to arrive at and didn't. That is rawness and that earthy quality of the building. And yeah, it is said we are born from the earth and we return to the earth after we die. Well, perhaps in a building that is built from like bricks, we feel more at home than in a building which is built of artificial materials. Plus, I think bricks, the bricks age well, organic materials age well, and they are indeed sustainable. So this house by Gandhi is a quaint red brick house that has undone the concept of home. This project is a perfect example of Nari's out-of-the-box thinking. This shows that a house need not be a space confined to walls and ceilings, but can be a collection of organic spaces, open, semi-open, and scattered. Again, this too is a climate-responsive design with sloping roofs, clerestory windows, and deep overhangs. This project was more of remodeling work, and the main highlights include retention of the dense vegetation on the site, usage of locally available red bricks, and tree trunks as the main materials of construction, and use of local jeru as a paint of walls. I don't know what that is. Revdanda House is more than a house. The large fenestrations aided for an unobstructed view, for the tree trunks to grow, and also served as spaces for art objects like terracotta pots. The house and the design is an artistic mural in itself. I didn't write this text, so anyway, it's fine. Maybe Neufert would have protested, that's there. That the angle is not correct, that is a little bit too abrupt, it's maybe a little bit too narrow. But I'm sorry, Mr. Neufert, life is not like your manual for architects is. And strangely, maybe Ernest Neufert studied at the Bauhaus. Not only that, surprise, surprise, Ernest Neufert loved Gaudi. Can you believe it? The same architect who tortured countless students with his restrictive, so-called rational measurements and so on, and calculations, loved Gaudi, Antoni Gaudi. Incredible. But then opposites attract. It's an interesting building. It's a good building. I would have loved to live in this building, but unfortunately I have to settle for much less. Anyway, and look at this tree, which is hanging on to life in the happy vicinity of some bicycles. I love bicycles. And I think the future belongs to the bicycles and to the village, not to the city and not to the Mercedes. Although once I bought a kind of an expensive car too for my daughter. Well, it was second hand and it was not expensive at all. But so, it was said there is this saying that we become what we hate. So it's very possible someone who, is intensely against cars actually deep down loves cars. I don't know. I shouldn't be so self-derogatory. But I like that tree, although it is dry, it's not green, but it's so impressive, almost artistically impressive. It's dramatic, it's theatrical. Anyway, this is another house, a beach house. So every project of Nari Gandhi has an interesting story to tell. As far as this beach house at Madh Island is concerned, the story is that he was involved right from the stage of site selection. The design of the house began with the construction of the 3 huge vaults that form the prime part of the superstructure, whereas the extrados of the vaults was filled with the earth, and the rood, I don't know what that is, formed, was converted into a huge terrace garden. It's actually a cave. I said it, I think even yesterday, the cave revival, the return to the cave. Uh, Here, the distinction between the outside and the inside is diluted. I remember Milarepa, the great mystic and poet, and Brâncuș, Constantin Brâncuș, he thought that he was some kind of a reincarnation of Milarepa. Well, Milarepa wrote once a little poem. He was living in a cave and he didn't have anything, any belongings. He didn't have furniture. He didn't have anything except a broken how is it called, blanket underneath him. So he wrote a little poem where he said, people are afraid of thieves, but I'm not afraid of thieves. I mean, what would the thieves steal from me? The broken blanket? The cave? I have nothing else. I'm not suggesting here to return all of us to the cave, but maybe, our unending fears. Did you notice how many keys people of our days have? Even myself, I have, an embarrassing number of keys. We have so many keys because we have so many little belongings that we don't want to lose, and so everything needs a key. What about a house that doesn't need keys and doesn't have any fears because there isn't really much to lose. I'm not advocating poverty necessarily, although in the United States I used to tell to some skeptical and even frightened Americans, poverty will save you. Actually, there is a lot of poverty in the United States, a lot, much more than Hollywood is willing to acknowledge. And terrible poverty. All poverty is terrible, but in the United States is the worst. I mean, you can be very, very, very poor, although you have a TV in every corner of the room and maybe a Cadillac in front of the apartment building, and still be depressingly poor. Anyway, about this, maybe we'll talk some other time. What is richness? What is poverty? The elliptical openings in the vaults for light, as well as to facilitate hanging of the swing. I don't know. I have a feeling this text is a translation from a different language and is not the best translation. Sorry. Skylight domes affixed with capped glass chips, broken glass beer bottles. He used even beer bottles, bravo to him. And the vaulted canopy made from thin nylon strings and mother of pearl shells are the features that make this house quite an unusual masterpiece. Could we call a cave a masterpiece? Well, this is not a cave. It has some parts that, resemble a cave, but it's man-made. But it's interesting. Please do not tell me that abruptly the presentation ended.